Fear is not the enemy. It's the silent architect of the life you never live. Every second you hesitate, doubt builds a stronger wall around your potential. It whispers in your ear, convincing you that safety is better than significance. But here's the truth. The future does not wait for the brave to feel ready. It rewards the brave who act while terrified. Right now, as you sit here, the gap between who you are and who you can become is filled with lack of talent. It's filled with fear you've mistaken for truth. This is not just another motivational speech. This is a call to war. The quiet war inside your mind where your dreams and your doubts collide. The difference between the people who build legacies and the people who watch from the sidelines isn't fearlessness. It's the decision to stop letting fear hold the pen to their story. Fear doesn't disappear with age, success, or experience. It evolves, and so must we. Most men grow up believing fear is something to be conquered, an enemy to defeat. They think that one day they'll wake up fearless, unshaken, immune to doubt. But that day never comes. Fear doesn't vanish, it matures with you. The man who once feared rejection now fears failure. The one who feared being unseen now fears being irrelevant. Growth isn't about erasing fear. It's about expanding beyond its control. Every man is taught to wear confidence like armor, to never show weakness, to never let fear surface. Yet inside, that armor often feels like a cage. Women see it too. They see the silent battles men fight with themselves, the hesitation behind their decisions, the weight of expectations that choke vulnerability. Men are told to be strong, but they're rarely told that true strength begins where fear is acknowledged, not ignored. When a man admits his fear, not as a confession, but as awareness, he begins to outgrow it. He stops pretending to be fearless and starts practicing courage. Fear thrives in silence. It grows in the spaces where men don't talk, where women misunderstand, and where truth gets replaced by performance. The moments we choose not to speak about our doubts are the moments fear deepens its roots. A man's fear of failure isn't about failing. It's about what failure says about his worth. For women, fear often whispers that they're not enough, that they must prove perfect or please. But for men, it's different. Fear tells them if they fall, no one will catch them. That no one will respect the man who admits he's afraid. And that illusion keeps them small. To outgrow fear, a man must redefine what growth means. It's not climbing higher so no one can see his weakness. It's growing wider so he can hold more of himself. When he starts to see fear as feedback instead of failure, he changes the relationship. The fear of rejection becomes a sign that he's reaching for something meaningful. The fear of not being enough becomes proof that he's aiming beyond comfort. Growth doesn't happen in the absence of fear. It happens in the presence of it. When you stop letting it dictate your limits. Women often evolve emotionally faster because they are taught to express, to communicate, to feel through pain. Men, on the other hand, are conditioned to endure, to solve, to suppress. But endurance without awareness doesn't build strength. It builds distance. The men who outgrow fear are not the ones who deny it, but the ones who face it with curiosity. They don't ask, How do I get rid of this feeling? They ask, what is this fear trying to teach me? That shift transforms fear from a wall into a window. Outgrowing fear is not about being braver than others. It's about being truer to yourself. It's realizing that fear will always walk beside you, but it doesn't have to lead. The man who outgrows his fear doesn't silence it. He listens, learns, and then moves anyway. Because fear doesn't leave. You simply rise higher than its reach. Self-doubt doesn't appear when you're lost. It shows up when you're finally finding your way. It's the mind's last defense before transformation. Just when you start stepping into something greater, that voice inside begins to whisper, who do you think you are? It's not coincidence. It's biology and conditioning. The closer you get to change, the more your brain resists it. It's designed to keep you safe, not fulfilled. And that's the trap. Most men confuse safety with strength, mistaking stillness for control when, in truth, it's fear disguised as logic. Every man reaches a point where he can feel himself stretching beyond what's familiar. It's the moment before a big decision, a career risk, a personal shift, a vulnerable confession. That's when self-doubt screams the loudest. It's the same voice that once kept him from falling off the edge as a child. But now, as a man, it keeps him from stepping into something greater. The irony is that the voice of doubt feels the strongest right before the brace. He's unready, not because he's unready, but because he's about to outgrow who he used to be. Self-doubt is not proof that you're failing, it's proof that you're evolving. For men, self-doubt often carries a unique weight. It's not just about ability. It's about ability. Society conditions men to define themselves by certainty, by knowing, by fixing. So when a man feels unsure, he doesn't just question his skill, he questions his worth. Women, on the other hand, have been raised in a culture that expects them to question themselves constantly. They're told to prove, to perfect, to please. Men are told to perform. Both end up in the same prison, just built differently. Self-doubt thrives where expression is forbidden and perfection is demanded. The truth is, growth feels like failure at first. It feels uncomfortable because you're stepping outside the version of yourself that was once enough. When you're growing, you don't feel strong. You feel exposed. That's why many men mistake progress for weakness. They think, if I were truly ready, I wouldn't feel this way. But readiness isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to move despite it. The moment you begin to doubt yourself is the moment you're crossing from comfort into courage. That inner voice doesn't mean stop. It means keep going. Women often see this in the men around them. The hesitation, the withdrawal, the subtle insecurity masked as control. They sense when a man is at the edge of growth because he becomes quieter, more guarded, more defensive. But underneath that silence is something sacred, a man wrestling with his own evolution. The men who learn to recognize that moment, who can stand in the noise of doubt without running back to safety, are the ones who transform, not because they stop doubting, but because they learn to keep walking through it. Self-doubt is not the enemy of growth. It's the companion of it. It arrives as a test, asking, were you ready to leave behind who you were? Most turn back when the noise becomes unbearable. But those who listen, breathe, and move forward anyway discover something profound, that the voice of doubt was never there to destroy them, only to make sure they were ready to meet the next version of themselves. Courage has never been about feeling fearless. It's about choosing to act while fear still has a pulse in your chest. Too many men wait for the moment when fear disappears before they move, believing courage is something that arrives after clarity. But courage doesn't come from confidence. It comes from defiance. It's the quiet rebellion against the voice that tells you to stay safe, to stay quiet, to stay small. Fear says, not yet. Courage whispers, now. Every man who's ever done something meaningful didn't wait for permission from comfort. He decided to walk into the storm, knowing he might not come out the same. From a young age, men are taught to suppress fear, to bury it under toughness, to never flinch. But fear doesn't vanish because it's hidden. It mutates. It shows up in hesitation, in overthinking, in the need for control. Women often see it before men do. They notice when a man stops taking risks, when he starts defending instead of dreaming, when his conversations turn from what could be to what might go wrong. It's not that he's lost ambition, it's that he's surrendered to fear disguised as logic. True courage begins when a man recognizes that fear is not the problem. His silence about it is. Rebellion doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a small decision made in private. A man deciding to have that difficult conversation, to leave the job that drains him, to speak his truth even when his voice shakes. Courage isn't found in grand gestures. It's built in quiet defiance. It's built every time a man chooses honesty over approval, purpose over comfort, and action over paralysis. The world celebrates results, but courage lives in the unseen moments before them, in the choice to take one more step while fear screams that you shouldn't. For women, courage often expresses itself differently, but is born from the same struggle. Many women live with fear woven into their daily existence. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. Yet, their courage often takes shape in persistence, in resilience, in the act of showing up again and again despite those fears. For men, courage often demands vulnerability, the willingness to be seen without the mask of control. That's harder than most admit. It's one thing to face an external threat. It's another to fund the emotional battles we've been told to hide. Fear doesn't go away when you succeed. It evolves as you do. The moment a man conquers one fear, another emerges to test how deeply he believes in himself. That's not failure, that's growth. The goal isn't to eliminate fear, but to stop letting it dictate the boundaries of your life. Courage is the decision to move toward what matters, even when your knees tremble. It's the internal rebellion that says, I refuse to let fear write my story. Every great act of courage in history started as a simple act of disobedience, not against others, but against the limits fear tried to impose. When men and women begin to understand that fear is inevitable, they stop waiting for it to leave and start learning how to lead it. Courage doesn't silence fear. It walks beside it, one step ahead, proving with every breath that growth only begins when comfort ends. The mind is a mirror that reflects the voice it hears most often. What you tell yourself daily, you begin to believe, even when it's not true. Most men don't realize how many of their limitations come not from their circumstances, but from the repetition of internal lies. I'm not ready. I'm not good enough. Someone else could do it better. Those words, repeated long enough, become convictions. The brain doesn't know the difference between truth and repetition. It simply accepts what it hears the most. And that's where the silent battle begins. Not in the world around us, but in the echo chamber inside our heads. Men are often taught to listen to reason, to logic, to the rational part of the mind. But the subconscious doesn't respond to logic. It responds to language. You can't outthink a belief that's been programmed by repetition. You can't argue your way out of a mindset that's been rehearsed for years. A man who constantly tells himself he's not capable will begin to act accordingly, shrinking from opportunity, not because he lacks potential, but because he's trained his mind to doubt his own strength. Women often notice this before men do. They see it in hesitation, in avoidance, in the way a man hides behind overwork or control to mask quiet insecurity. The voice we repeat shapes the way we see the world. If a man's inner dialogue is filled with criticism, the world starts to look hostile, competitive, unforgiving. But when he begins to speak with intention, to affirm rather than attack himself, the mind adapts. This isn't false positivity, it's rewiring. When a man learns to speak to himself the way he would to someone he loves, he begins to dismantle the patterns that kept him stuck. Women are often quicker to embrace this truth because society allows them more room to feel, to express, to nurture. Men are told to be stoic, to stay composed, to avoid the language of emotion. Yet the strongest men are those who master the tone of their inner voice, not the volume of their outer one. The language of the mind is repetition. Every belief, whether empowering or destructive, was built through it. So if fear and doubt were learned through repetition, confidence and courage can be learned the same way. The challenge is consistency. It's easy to speak with conviction once. It's harder to do it every day, especially when results aren't immediate. But growth happens in the rewiring, not the outcome. A man who chooses to repeat faith over fear, even when he doesn't feel it yet, begins to transform. His actions follow his beliefs, and his beliefs follow his words. What we whisper to ourselves in moments of silence determines how we show up when life gets loud. The mind believes the voice it hears most, whether it's building you or breaking you. That's why awareness is power. Because once a man becomes conscious of his inner dialogue, he can change the narrative. The shift begins when he decides to stop repeating the words that keep small and starts enforcing the truth of who he's becoming. The world responds to that inner certainty long before it recognizes success. Because what the mind believes, the man begins to live. Fear feeds on stillness. It grows in the moments between intention and action, in the hesitation before the first step. The longer you wait, the louder it becomes. But the moment you move, the moment you act, fear loses its oxygen. Action doesn't just change your situation, it changes your state of mind. It gives your brain proof that movement is possible, that progress can exist even when certainty does not. That's why most people aren't defeated by fear itself, but by their delay in facing it. The cure has always been motion. Men often believe they must think their way through fear, analyze every outcome, plan every possibility. But fear thrives in overthinking. It disguises itself as preparation. The endless plan and the need to feel ready becomes a sophisticated form of avoidance. Women often recognize this pattern. They sense when a man is stuck in his head, hiding behind logic, because taking action feels too vulnerable. But action doesn't require readiness, it requires decision. The truth is, clarity doesn't come before movement. It's created by it. You can't think your way into courage. You can only act your way into it. Fear hates evidence. Every time you take a step forward, you gather proof that your fear was exaggerated, that the story it told you wasn't real. The first step may not erase the fear, but it weakens its authority. Action rewires the brain. It teaches you that discomfort isn't danger, that uncertainty isn't failure. Men especially are conditioned to seek control before they act. They want guarantees, outcomes, results. But growth doesn't live in guarantees. It lives in uncertainty. The moment a man acts despite fear, he's no longer controlled by it. That's the rebellion that transforms him. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear dictate his direction. Women often experience fear through emotional depth, through the lens of connection and consequence. For them, action often means choosing vulnerability, speaking truth, stepping into authenticity, even when it risks judgment. For men, action is sometimes misunderstood as aggression or dominance, when in reality, the most powerful action a man can take is often the simplest one, admitting he's afraid and moving anyway. Courage doesn't need noise, it needs momentum. Fear doesn't disappear because you wait, it disappears because you act. Action creates momentum, and momentum creates belief. The human mind follows movement. It adjusts its perception based on what you do, not what you think. That's why taking small steps consistently is far more powerful than waiting for one big leap. Each small action builds self-trust, and self-trust is the foundation that fear cannot survive on. When a man keeps his promises to himself, even the smallest ones, he starts to rebuild confidence from the inside out. Women do this naturally through emotional consistency. Men do it through purposeful action. Both paths lead to the same truth. Movement dissolves fear. The mistake most people make is waiting for motivation to act. But motivation doesn't come before action. It's the result of it. You don't feel ready and then move. You move and then you feel ready. Every step forward, every conversation faced, every challenge embraced teaches the body and mind a new truth that fear was never a wall, only a shadow. Once you walk toward it, it fades. Action is not just motion, it's medicine. It doesn't silence fear through force, but through evidence. Because when you act, you prove to yourself that fear has no power over a moving target. Every excuse feels reasonable in the moment. It sounds logical, even protective. I'm not ready yet. I don't have enough time. It's not the right moment. But excuses are not made of truth. They're built from fear. They exist to shield us from the discomfort of change. Every man and woman has a vision of who they could be. A stronger, wiser, more fulfilled version of themselves. But most never meet that person. Not because they aren't capable, but because their excuses stand guard at the door. Your future self is not hiding from you. It's waiting for you to stop hiding behind your reasons. Men are particularly skilled at justifying their hesitation. They mask it as practicality, strategy, or responsibility. I'll take the risk when things are more stable. I'll focus on myself once the timing is right. These sentences sound mature, but underneath them is fear disguised as wisdom. It's easier to rationalize than to risk. Women often see through this. They notice when a man's potential is buried under layers of overthinking. They sense when he's building walls and calling them boundaries. Excuses feel safe, but they don't protect. They imprison. They keep you busy explaining why you can't, instead of showing what happens when you try. Growth demands honesty, not justification. Every time you defend your limitations, you strengthen them. The voice of self-doubt doesn't disappear. It becomes fluent in logic. It convinces you that waiting makes you smart, that caution equals strength. But the truth is, your excuses will always sound smarter than your dreams, because dreams require faith. The man who waits for confidence before he acts never moves. The woman who waits for perfection before she begins never starts. The future belongs to those who act despite the noise, who trade comfort for curiosity and excuses for evidence. Excuses are a form of self-protection. They're built to preserve identity. A man to preserve identity, and the provider fear what happens if he fails in pursuit of something new. A woman who's always been the caretaker fears what happens if she chooses herself. Excuses help them both stay in the roles they know best. But comfort is not fulfillment. It's familiarity. To become who you are meant to be, you must be willing to disappoint the version of yourself that keeps you small. The mind will resist. It will whisper that there's more time, that you can start later. But later is a silent graveyard where unrealized potential goes to die. The future self is not a fantasy. It's a reflection of your current decisions. Every action you delay, every step you postpone, becomes a distance between who you are and who you could be. The excuses that once made sense start to sound hollow the moment you realize no one to fix your hesitation. You either move or you remain. Progress doesn't come from perfect conditions. It comes from imperfect consistency. Each time you push through an excuse, you break a link in the chain that's kept you repeating the same year over and over again. Men often measure progress by results. They want proof that the risk was worth it before taking the first step. But transformation doesn't work that way. You can't negotiate with growth. You can only surrender to it. Women tend to evolve through emotion. They feel the friction of stagnation until they can no longer ignore it. Men, however, often rationalize the friction until it numbs them. But the pain of regret is heavier than the discomfort of effort. The future self doesn't demand perfection. It demands motion. Every excuse you make is a story that delays that meeting. At some point, a man must realize that the only thing standing between him and the life he envisions isn't lack of opportunity. It's permission. He's waiting for someone to tell him it's time, but no one will. The same goes for women who wait for clarity before change. Clarity doesn't arrive before the leap. It's discovered in the air. The future self isn't somewhere distant. It's just beyond the line of your excuses, waiting patiently for you to stop explaining why you can't and start proving why you can.